In case you're wondering,
I didn't even notice.
you didn't notice. So if y'all are not doing anything on Saturday through Monday, if anyone knows where the Horn of the West is, we are going to be doing Dracula. So I am directing, and I'm also in the cast. I'm Arthur Seward, which is kind of a Satanism for two of the other characters actually in the book. So it's Horn of the West, the coffee cabin. It's behind the coffee cabin where everything is in the semicircle. And bring your own chair if you wish. Bring whatever you need to keep yourselves warm. We're out in the real world where it's live. So the gate opens at 6:30. The show will start at 7, and it's going to be a cool time. We did this last year, and it was interesting. It's actually a 1938 radio play. In 1938, Orson Welles, the great Orson Welles, there are few people who really deserve to be called great, and Orson Welles is such an individual. He did a series of 13 of the greatest plays ever written, and he wrote them for an hour-long radio show during this time. He did some of the best in the world, A Tale of Two Cities, Great Expectations, The 39 Steps, A Sherlock Holmes, and of course the one that maybe most everyone remembers, War of the Worlds. But he started first with this one. So Dracula, I don't know if you know, has had an amazing history. In the 19th century, when the Gothic horror originally started, you had these incredible things that were happening that were flexing and changing society. So you had the great industrial revolution and the confidence that technology would cure everything. But you had the humanities asking, is this the true sense of where everything is going? Can technology cure everything? And so we had the great novel by Mary Shelley of Frankenstein. Then we had the picture of Dorian Gray. We had Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And then finally in 1891, we had the great Bram Stoker's Dracula. If you've never read it, it's a very interesting book and it's very readable even now. Dracula is basically a series of diaries. And so it's the diary of Arthur Stewart, the diary of Jonathan Harker, the diary of Mina Harker, and it's done in a narrative style, and it was brilliantly written. And I was trying to look this up. They cannot count the number of movies and plays that have done on the theme of Dracula. It goes over 2,000, and who knows where it is now. This, in 1938, by Orson Welles, was written exactly for an hour-long play. So it has a beginning, it has a break in the middle, and it has a second act, and it's great. It really is. So if you want to do something and have fun for an hour, it's $10 at the door. We'll have a square there, so if you need to charge it on your card, there'll be concessions there. If you want to bring your own drinks, go right ahead. And it'll be a good time. The interesting thing is that we originally set it up to be like a regular radio show. So we had the lights, the on the air screen, and then the night before the performance, disaster happened. All of the lights blew out. And so we were left with no lights. We had pin lights to be able to read our scripts. And I also have a projector that's showing the slideshow from the 1921 Nosferatu, which is a public domain movie, as a matter of fact. When Nosferatu was directed and staged, Bram Stoker was still alive, and they did not get permission from Bram Stoker. It had already been published, so the only justice they could do was to make it public domain, so anyone can watch it and read it and that kind of thing. So anyway, that's why I'm dressed like I am. In case you're wondering. Just one other thing, I'll go a little bad on you here. You know, in your life, learn to have a well-balanced rich, unique kind of life. It doesn't always have to be just about your studies or just about your work. One of the things that we hope to do in the university structure is what's called a liberal arts education, where you're not just given business classes, that you're given science classes and history classes and round yourself out as an individual. The Greeks used to say mens sana, corpora sana, which means sound mind, sound body, which means that you had an eclectic mix. Am I right? You know, I mean, it's part of a good growing up that you exercise both sides of your brain. And so this is how I do it. This is how I relieve my own stress. And I hope you find a way of doing that as well.
Is the play scary?
You know, it's a good question. It can get scary. You know, the interesting thing about it, like I said, is when the lights went out, it created an entirely new ensemble. It went, you know, like, so it's 7 o'clock at night, the sun's just going down. It gets darker during the play. The wind kicks up like it does in Boone. It's outside and it gets a little creepy. And so it all adds to it. Okay. You know, you never lose the fact that it is a radio show, but yeah, you know, creepy a little bit if you haven't heard it or seen it. So we will, by the way, record it for ASU radio. So we have a gentleman, Gabe Combray, who's part of the RTF here, radio, television, film here. So he's one of the students who's in it. We have 2 students in it. And we'll also have we're going to have a video recording of it. And so we'll put that on YouTube as well. Okay. All right. So if you're not doing anything, come out and enjoy. Okay. Hey, Jim.
How are-
Always dressed.
How are
man.
you?
I'm good, man.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know where you get it. Where did you get that?
Where'd I get it?
Yeah.
Well, this is a combination of steampunk and these are actual real riding boots, by the way.
Those are nice.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, they're actually like the motorcycle.
Some
boots
people will do almost anything to get good teaching evaluations.
Yeah, why not?
You guys have fun.
I'm trying for tenure next year, you know? I mean, social shows are so funny. Okay, so anyway. Yes, that was my boss. That was Jim Stoddard. So, yes. He just walks by my door and shakes his head. What's he up to now? You know? Okay, so let's see if we can finish chapter 6. I will have all of the rest of the grades done. Promise. Okay, so we talked about the cost side strategies last time, and now we're going to talk about the other side. Excuse me. Come on. That's what I'm looking for. And well, we talked about the cost side positioning strategies on Tuesday. We're going to talk about the demand side positioning strategies. And then we're going to talk about a taxonomy, which tends to be a collection or a group of other retail positioning strategies. And then we'll talk ultimately about the strength and power that retail has and still has. So as we talked about before, we have 2 ways that we can hopefully be able to achieve success. And it's very simple. We either reduce our costs or we increase our revenue. Well, we all recognize these. These are old friends of ours. And these are positioning strategies that we use. And we, of course, we do these. It's not completely on or completely off. I mean, some of these are stressed more versus others. And these are the demand side positioning strategies that retail companies use in order to achieve success. So here we are, we've seen many of them before. And of course, the first one we'll talk about is bulk breaking. And bulk breaking is truly the provenance of a retail intermediary. If we think about a retail store, there may not be any single thing that separates a retail store from a wholesaler other than bulk freight. In the traditional sense, what retailers do is they buy in large quantities and hopefully offer the consumer exactly the quantity they want. And of course, as I've said before about bulk breaking, the ironic thing in a way is that the smaller the sizes we can come up with, the more bite sizes that consumers can accept. Bulk breaking, of course, goes in both directions. It's not a single direction towards the smallest size. Larger stores like Costco and Sam's Choice, not Sam's Choice, but Sam's, the food clubs build themselves out of deliberately having larger sizes. And because the consumer performs certain channel functions, the retail outlets give the consumer a break because the consumer is the one that ultimately is going to break the bulk. So we had our guest from Dollar General come in, talk about their forms and what they do. And here's the difference between a dollar store and a convenience store. Because a convenience store, although it's important for bulk breaking, it is secondary to spatial convenience. Although with 28,000 stores, it's kind of messing up the whole mix, okay? But bulk breaking, you offer small quantities and hopefully at low prices. And that is their way of creating a unique and valued service. So here's spatial convenience, as I just talked about. Spatial convenience basically states that convenience is more important than the breaking of bulk. What spatial convenience says is that convenience stores should be convenient. And who defines what spatial convenience is? It's usually the consumer anyway. But they vary what's convenient across consumer segments. And of course, with changing demographics and lifestyle trends, we find that the whole concept of what spatial convenience is always on the move. So Walgreens and Rite Aid. Walgreens has somewhere in the area of 6,000 stores across the United States. Now, what can you buy in a Walgreens? Yes, so much. It's the perfect answer. All right.
They're
Now,
changing.
yeah, they are. They are changing because once again, they change with the wind of the consumers. Okay. Yeah. And when Walgreens was a traditional pharmacy store, which sold pharmacy and beauty products, they suddenly, I don't know if you want to call it for whatever reason, realized that they have 6,000 locations across the United States in areas of personal convenience for consumers. And if they're providing pharmaceuticals and beauty products that bring consumers into the store, why not have a few other extra things so that they can pick up those extra things along the way?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
In West Germany, they built a brand new Walgreens, it is like half. So
So they shrunk it, yes.
they're shrinking, they're just doing, I haven't been in there, but they're mostly prescriptions.
Yes, yes, because what they're doing now are specialty stores now. And that the traditional Walgreens, well, I'll tell you what the great shrinkage was between Walgreens, Rite Aid, and there was one other one, I can't remember. Eckerd's, yeah. And unfortunately, there's just too many of the same form, okay? Now, there are also dollar stores that have become pharmacies. So in Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, there is a store called Fred's Discount Pharmacy. And they used to be traditional dollar stores, and they've actually added a pharmacy onto the system. And they've, in essence, done the reverse of what Walgreens has done. So spatial convenience can mean many things for many people, but what it ultimately means is that they are locations convenient to the target market. Okay. So waiting and delivery time all depends on the consumer's willingness to tolerate an out of stock situation. Despite Dollar General's push towards 28,000 stores, I think if you talk to them, they have a really serious concern about whether or not they're going to make deliveries to 28,000 stores. As he talked about it, their system right now is in a virtual gridlock. But it's important to understand if you're going to do, maximum return on individual space, then you have to make sure that an out of stock situation doesn't occur often. Let's also say this with risk, with financial risk, that consumers are very often willing to trade wait times for better service outputs. So I have been in this situation trying to get my father's van delivered to my sister in Mississippi. And I had to go there on that nightmare run Sunday and Monday. And for some reason, they can't get the fact that Lucedale, Mississippi isn't the same as Lumberton, Mississippi. And every time I call a driver, they go, "Oh, it's not in Lumberton." I go, "No, it's in Lucedale." And I've said this over and over again. And they'll say, "Well, it's going to cost more." And I say, "I'm not spending another penny more. Find a driver that'll drive it from Lucedale, and I'm willing to put up with that, all right, for a better service output." Now, once again, the trade is, if I'm someone who believes that spatial convenience is important, my waiting and delivery time willingness is a lot lower because I need to get it when I need to get it. This also is that thing with convenience items and fast-moving consumer goods. Quite simply, you don't tolerate out-of-stock situations. Now, one of the things that's kind of let retail outlets off is this fact that quite simply we're in a situation of the pandemic where supply chain is all cattywampus right now, and we're willing to accept the fact that we can't get it everywhere we want. And so, as I've said before, there's always this kind of eclectic mix of all of these things together. So, as we've explained, this has come up, this will be the third time, is product variety. And so variety is the different number of product lines from condiments to breads to meats to electronics. And assortment is the depth of different product brands in the same category. And so in mustards, Bhutan, Pines, oh gosh, I'm going blank, but everything that you can think of in a particular product line. And that variety and assortment can be purposely narrowed to appeal to a particular niche. Now, a store like Walmart, as I've said before, has everything, but a little bit of everything. And so their breadth is just as deep, if you want to think of it as a Harris Teeter or a Publix, but the depth is certainly not the same. And the other thing is that because of the desire of a supermarket to be able to maintain everything that you would hope for, top management is going to be very careful about what they listen for from consumers. So I was in Lowe's. I used to eat English muffins before I got off of them, but keto. But there was a brand of English muffin called Haas that is refrigerated, and it's delicious. And it's an old-fashioned kind of wrapping and everything on it. And so I went into Lowe's one day, and there was nothing there. I mean, they were gone. And I went, oh, like that. And there was actually a grocer next to me, and he said, "You couldn't find something, sir?" And I said, "No, I just saw you discontinue the loss. It's too bad." 2 weeks later, they were back in. Not only that, but they have different varieties as well. So top management, or let's just say the Lowe's individual that I talked to, listened to me as a consumer, and they actually bought that. So if you remember also, Mr. Stegall talked about being a buyer, and that he, as a buyer, played a major role in the retailer. His job was to make sure that the trade deals that they had were able to generate profits even on the back end, in other words, where the consumers aren't, through negotiation. Oh, bless you. And so his thing was, if he got a late delivery, if he got an unavailable, he was going to make sure that he got rebates or discounts. And so he desired variety, he expected variety, and if he didn't get it, he was going to get it on, he was going to get something back for it. And so we have stepped through bulk breaking, spatial convenience, waiting delivery, product variety, and then the last is customer service. Now, the one thing to say about customer service, it is often the most easily overlooked thing. And it is also one of the things that consumers judge as being the reason why they shop at a given store. What happens also is that we have a tendency of thinking of it as a cost that isn't necessarily generated for sale. Because what happens is stores think of having another person out there as a necessary evil. And yet, if I have the same good at multiple stores in the same geographic area, invariably the consumer is going to choose the store that has the best service. If I'm looking as a retail establishment for a way to separate myself from my competitors, customer service is the #1 way. And of course, this is a difficult situation to try to judge. What is the service that consumers really want in a retail store? And I can tell you one that I consider to be most important. I want to have somebody who will get my goods through the counters on my way out the door faster than anyone else. My brother and I were talking about this. There's a family-run store in Covington, and we've gone there before. It's a grocery store. The name knows it's a family for 3 generations, and it's an old-fashioned store. They have an incredible deli. The chicken salad is to die for. But one of the things that they don't have at that place is they don't have self-checkout. They have 6 counters for people to check out, and they dedicate themselves to having every one of those counters served when consumers come in. And you can bet that that draws a crowd. The fact that there are 6 people who are working to get you out of the system, bag your goods and get you out, that attracts a pretty large crowd. And yes, retailing is one of the few industries that really remains highly labor intensive. Just quite simply, think about the stocking of the shelves. One of the difficulties with buy online, pick up in store is that generally what it means is that if I do that, the stores generally earn about 15% less on every transaction, because what it means is that one of their employees has to go to the shelf, pull those goods off the shelf, and put it in a location for you to come pick it up. Doesn't mean that that's a bad thing, because you know what? Buy online, pick up in store means that your consumers are coming in the store. And so what many smart stores are doing is they're providing discounts while you're in. So if you come in at one time, they'll offer anywhere from 10 to 20% discount on buying other things while you're in the store at that time. And so we talked about the cost side strategies. These are the demand side. How do we increase demand and ultimately increase our bottom line, which is ultimately our return on investment? By the way, that's what that 2-point bonus question was, is what's the best thing? Everything's always about return on investment, okay? So, and a lot of you kind of mumbled around to that, and if you got close to it, I gave you credit. So, there is no such thing anymore as a traditional online. Well, there are still some, but there's also really no traditional brick and mortar store. Once again, there are some, but I think if we think about, we're talking about anywhere from 5 to 10% of the market. And what we find is that most stores have gone into what's called a multi-channel strategy. In other words, we're doing more than just quite simply selling inside of our store. Instead of a single channel environment, what we have is a multi-channel environment, all right? And so we have online, we have brick and mortar, we have the hybrid, okay? We have buy online, pick up at curb. There are a lot of different ways in which we can slice this onion. And so within this unique structures, we find so some work on a high margin rather than a high turnover. Some work on spatial convenience. All of those have to do with ultimately what is the best mix for the goods that they sell and the consumers that they're selling to. And so if we're looking at them, we're probably looking at 3 different kinds of retail strategies other than the traditional brick and mortar. And so we all know these. There is the internet retail channel. which is e-commerce. And of course, the brick and mortar retail, it still captures a significant portion of their sales. But the internet is truly as an e-commerce environment. And many times what they will do is sell goods through the internet channel that can't be bought in the retail stores. And so I noticed when I was going in Walmart looking at coffee pots, 2/3 of the coffee pots that Walmart has have to be bought online. So I'm just going in and browsing and looking. It's amazing how they did. There actually used to be a store called Wilson's or Service Merchandising. And Wilson's or Service Merchandising had the exact same idea that Walmart is doing now, but they were doing it 30 years too early. So Service Merchandising, what you could do is they had one model of everything on the floor. You would go in with a order list. You would put down the number of that particular item. You would give the list to the counter individual. They would total up the goods, and the goods would come from their back warehouse to where you were. It was a great idea, but it needed the internet to make it really work. Direct selling is anything in which there is face-to-face personal selling. There are many different direct selling channels that only work as a face-to-face selling. Avon products, Jafra, Pampered Chef. Those are all direct selling channels. Generally, they also have individuals who pay a franchise fee. They run parties. They get together with groups. The difficulty with the direct selling channel is that it tends to be thought of as a pyramid scheme because the better way to make money is to have distributors under you. And so your push is less about selling to consumers and more about lining up distributors under you. You make more money with distributors than you do actually selling products. The last is the hybrid channels, which is of course where we are now, where you combine brick and mortar with online selling strategies. And so you work back and forth. Now, of course, we have lived through this, and there is the difficulty with free riding, in which the consumer does all of his looking in a particular store because we have that visceral need to touch what we're going to buy, but we'll go online, ultimately purchase what we wish. But that's part of the hybrid channel. We accept it, and we have strategies, hopefully, to counteract it. One of those, quite simply, is the salesperson on the floor can say, if I can sell it to you at that same price, why don't you take it now instead of waiting 2 weeks? With hybrid retail channels, there is the natural problem with conflict and cannibalization. In other words, the sales are robbed from one organization to another. It has all of the problems of dual distribution. And the biggest problem, of course, is when an individual salesperson's compensation is tied up around the sales that they make. It becomes real tough for a salesperson when they spend their time pitching their goods and that consumer walks out and buys it somewhere else or buys it from the same company online. The world is moving and has moved very much towards this. Will there always be brick and mortar stores? Absolutely, especially where this is needed, all right? Steel tools, if you want to buy steel does not sell its goods online, not a single one. They'll direct you to the store closest to them, and they do the buying. Avon has been able to settle with their distributors by, you can order things online with Avon, but they will give part of that money to a local distributor, have the distributor bring you the goods, and then that distributor can hopefully try to sell you more. So it's an imperfect solution for an imperfect world. Hey, that's the world. And so I talked about direct sellers. It really has been stressful. And yes, they found a way of being able to adjust. But when the individual salesperson, their life and blood is tied up around their own effectiveness as a seller, to have those sales taken away from them can be pretty bitter. This is not in the same instance, but I pitched to the Lafayette School Board when I was in Lafayette, Louisiana. They had 50 units that I was going to sell when I was at Radio Shack. 50 units. That's like $100,000 sale. The check that I would get, at one time would have been around $10,000, just as one compensation check. And what happened is I lost it to a franchise dealer, Radio Shack, a gentleman by the name of Jim David, who lived in Church Point. See how I remember it? I mean, it burns in my mind. Yeah, Jim David was able to undercut me by 10% because he was a franchise store, and I had to stick with the existing structure that Radio Shack gave me. Okay, so these are the kinds of things that can happen. The last part that we wanted to talk about is, even with all of the difficulties that retailing has had over the generations, retail is still the strongest. I talked about in 1996, Parasimon wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review where he talked about the power shift the channel captains had permanently changed from the manufacturer to the retailer with the advent of the strength of Walmart. And that power and the strength as a channel captain has not changed in 30 years. And I don't think it will, even though we have the internet on our side. The internet essence is just one more channel in which we sell. So what is the power that retail has? Well, competition, especially to the end user, is based upon price. If I have consumers coming in expecting a good to be 10% lower in price, and it is such to the point where I have no choice but to give that discount of 10% in order to stay alive, then unfortunately, I have very little places to go. And so if I were going to look at this, I kind of would look at this as the 5 reasons why retailers dominate. So you can put like a 1 and a 2, and we'll go to the next slides, go 3, 4, 5. All right. The first thing is that retailers have little choice to be able to survive other than make pressures on their suppliers for price concessions of their own. I would say it is safe to say since 2016, and I think we've seen it, that retailing establishments have reached a saturation point, maybe too many. And that when online stores became so popular or started, retail stores were unable to be able to handle the pressure. In order for retail stores to grow in the market that it is now, if we think about a mature market in which the sales stay the same, the only way that our store can grow is that if we steal margin from some other store. Which means that the world has changed, and so that The negotiation process is entirely different. Retailers seek to improve their productivity and hopefully lower their costs and hopefully keeping their prices the same. Supermarkets, mass merchandisers hope to be able to increase their sales volumes ultimately because that's the only way they can gain. When you only have 2% margin in which you're making money off of, other than if you're deli or the meat market, you have very few places to go. And so the only way you're going to be able to increase revenue is to decrease cost. It's the only way.
I have a friend here on the service station.
Yeah.
They make about 2 cents a gallon.
Yeah.
People think they make 25 cents a gallon.
No,
They
no.
don't, their margins are, and they have no, says that on the price, their job or tells them what the sales.
Right.
Their wholesale.
It doesn't help that in the United States, there's only a 3-day supply of gasoline in the pipeline. Yeah. So it means quite simply this is that twice a week, the price of gas will probably change. Okay. We have no backup in the United States. We have one refiner in the United States of gasoline. It's in Cameron, Louisiana. And we haven't built one in 40 years. Yeah. Yeah. So the gasoline, and the funny thing is that gasoline is inherently the last product that comes out of a barrel of oil. All right. And the other part of that is that 48% of gas, the price of gas is in taxes. All right. So if you're going to look at the price of gasoline versus another, usually the first thing you have to do is take off the refinery and talk about how much of that margin is being taxed. Okay. Now it's good. It's road taxes. Okay. It's upkeep taxes for, I mean, all of those things like large trucks, they have to pay. Of course, they damage the roads. But as we all know, taxes are fungible. So you can always rob a tax and use it for something else. Okay. So with increased pressure on companies means increased pressures on retail buyers. So our friend, Mr. Stegall, talked about his problem as a buyer to go out and find those goods that he needed at the lowest possible price. You also have problems on the turnover of goods, the number of items that they buy, hopefully with the promise that they can buy them later. This number 4 one, the second bullet, may be the most powerful of all. And that is that retailers can threaten to buy not to buy most manufacturers' products, quite simply because there are so many alternatives. If Samsung, as an electronics manufacturer, wants to put pressure on a retail outlet, that retail outlet can quite simply go to TCL or another Taiwanese manufacturer of electronics and have those goods replaced. And so the pressure that goes on is enormous. Not only that, but think about it, there's 100,000 grocery stores in the United States. All of those competing against each other. And especially in times like now, consumers are more considerate of price than anything else. And so this is also the advent of company brands too. And so the last is that suppliers have made a Faustian bargain, a bargain with the devil. And unfortunately, we're gonna be mixing our metaphors. The chickens have come home to roost. Suppliers have bribed their way into stores. They have paid retailers to be able to put their goods on the shelves in exclusion of other dealerships. And what's happened? Well, like just what happens every time you bribe someone, guess what? It's all that they expect. Exactly. I mean, it's the problem with when we're going to talk about power. We talk about reward power, the power of giving rewards. You know, if you do this, I'll give you a cookie. But the problem with that is that if I do that for my daughters and say, finish your homework and I'll give you a cookie, tomorrow she's going to say, Daddy, I did my homework. Where's my cookie? And that's what happens. It's a very simple thing. We're all human. All right. And it's these deals, unfortunately, that have got into their ways. And so what has happened is we have these deals that are offered by the manufacturers to the retailers, and the retailers now have the expectation that this is what's expected if you're going to do business with me. And so the first one is what's known as forward buying. Forward buying basically means that I'm going to buy more than what I need. I will buy, the retailer is basically saying, the manufacturer is saying to the retailer, well, I know you only use this much in a month, but if you buy 6 months worth of goods, I'll give you a 40% discount. Now, the difficulty with the manufacturer is when it comes to forecasting what their ultimate demand is, it's crazy. You know, it plays havoc. You don't know what's accurate and what's not. What you hope for, or the way to do it is that if you buy 6 months worth of goods and ask them to stock those goods on the manufacturer's shelves and don't bring them into my store, then that's a solution, which is the continuous replenishment program, the CRP, that Walmart ultimately came up with. The continuous replenishment program basically says is, I will settle on a price by 10,000 of these items that I expect to use in the next 6 months. And whenever I go below 500, I automatically order another 1,000. And I promise to buy that 10,000 all within the next 6 months. Now there's a difficulty, and the difficulty is what's called the verdict. And this is one of those Faustian bargains that happens. Depending on where you are in the United States, there are many things that are more expensive in different states, depending on the laws of those particular states. And what can happen is if you're a national corporation and you have places spread across the United States, you will buy goods, let's say in the East, in significant numbers, and you'll ship them to the West. And that's what diverting is. It's the buying in the Midwest or the East Coast and then shipping them to the West. And diverting is where retailers and wholesalers buy large volumes with a promotion, let's say 40%, and then distribute them to other places where the discounts are available. And while this is a practice, I don't see where there's anything wrong with the truth. I mean, it's just, there's nothing illegal about it. There's nothing immoral about it. It's just what companies do in order to survive. Can anybody tell me the #1 trafficked area in the supermarket? Pardon? Close. But actually, milk, that's a good one. No, you're right. You're right in the area on Staples. I want you to think of the aisles of a store where is the most traffic in all of those shelves? Where would you expect it to be? They're actually, it's the same place on every one of the shelves. It's in one location. It's on the ends, okay? The ends of an aisle are the number one trafficked areas in any supermarket. And those are the areas that are the most valuable to a supermarket as well. The other two, by the way, are soft drinks and cereals, all right? Those have the highest per dollar amount that they get. But when it comes to those ends on it, those ends are more important than anyone else. What's known as a slotting allowance is when a seller or a supplier will pay extra money to get those places in the store. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, I should say yes, but traditionally they save those for Procter and Gamble, all right? Because Procter and Gamble is a huge, Procter and Gamble is the largest customer that Walmart has. And there's we'll have a discussion about the conflict and power negotiations that go on between the two of them. But yeah, oh yeah. Even though we have 100,000 stores, the scarcity of shelf space is real. And because of that, and because of the need to be able to have money, the slotting allowances have grown significantly. I should also say that especially for impulse items, if you go into a Dollar General, if you see that last little windy place where they make you go check out, that's a very high area for slotting allowances as well. Any store is, by the way. I find it interesting. They've got these labyrinths now. You've now got them in Staples. You've got them in every grocery store. Big Lots has them now. I think it's smart. It's brilliant. All right. And the difficulty is if you're a small manufacturer, those slotting allowances are huge. And we all know if we use the ADA model, awareness, interest, desire, and action, if you can't see it, you can't sell it. And so if it's in a bad place in the store, the possibilities is it's not going to succeed. What you find is that a lot of small manufacturers take a major risk and they have what's called a failure fee. So with a failure fee, if a new product fails to reach a certain amount of sales, the supplier or the manufacturer has to kick back money to the retail establishment. In other words, pay them for failure. That's correct. So if I've come out with this great little ShamWow or whatever, and I want to put it on the shelf in, let's say, a AutoZone, what the failure fee says is, we guarantee you'll sell 500 of these every month. And if you only sell 475, we have to kick $1,000 back to you. Right? That's what a failure fee is. Well, the problem is that's a very moral hazard. All right. You're paying someone for failure. And perhaps maybe the failure doesn't have to do with the inferiority of the product, but maybe the retailer is deliberately withholding support for that good so that they can get that failure. Human nature being what it is, it happens. The last, which is certainly not the worst, I think this is the best, is private branding. So private labels are very popular in Europe. If you go to the Aldi store, the one in Hickory, you will notice that 80 to 90% of what they sell is private brands. and they're enormously successful. Private brands, spit it out, Dave, are money savers. There used to be in the 70s what was known as generic brands, where literally the can was just white and it said green peas. Remember that? It was like a zoom in, zoom out. It was a fad, okay? There are manufacturers of vegetables, canned vegetables, that do not sell to the public. They sell only to Sam's or to Walmart, excuse me, or to Kroger's, and they slap their private brand names on them. I talk about this in wineries too. I've done wine research and a lot of research. And anyway, one of the things, there are a lot of wineries out there that do not sell to the public. They actually sell their wine to other wineries. The wineries take that. There are 20% of the wineries in North Carolina don't produce their own wine. They buy the wine from the Yadkin Valley. They put it in their own bottles. They slap their own labels on it, and they've got a wine. Okay, and it works. It's enormously successful. All right. I give Grandfather Winery enormous credit. They certainly do produce their wine, but it's impossible for them to be able to produce all of the wine that they sell. I mean, it's standing room only there if you've ever been there, and they close at 6. So it gives you an idea how successful they are, and they do this private branding. Now, generally what it also does is the private branding stuff is generally tends to be products that are not exponentially different from any other public brand. So if I go to Del Monte green peas and I look at a Sam's Choice green peas, you're going to look at the labels and they say green peas. There's nothing different between the two of them. However, if I buy a Sam's Choice green peas versus Del Monte, where Walmart makes 2%, on the Del Monte, they make 40% on the Sam's Choice. And that's ultimately how many stores like that survive. Many stores. You rarely do you find private label branding on things that you actually have to make or create. Okay. But many of the things from Trader Joe's, many of the things from Kroger's, they have a Sado brand name because you have to have one. But they're in essence the same thing. IGA, Independent Grocers Association, there are a lot of small supermarket stores out there that brand their soft drinks, and the soft drinks are not Coke and they're not Dr. Pepper, but the colors that they use are very close and similar, but they got to be very careful because Coca-Cola has an army of lawyers out there ready to take me to task if they do. So they come up with names like Bubba for the Coke and Dr. Pop for the Dr. Pepper, and it works. It works. So they offer a close substitute for the branded products. They target consumers who seek value for their money, and they do quite well. And if you're in Aldi, you actually do it to the point where you don't do anything else. So private branding is probably the best example of the best way to achieve some kind of success. Yes. They have different, well, yeah, but well, you look at it, different target market, different market segment, different consumers. You use the same structures for the marketing channels, and yet they work on entirely different situations. Okay, and you have the advantage of having piggybacking too, because you have different corporations using different marketing channels. So we had this question asked last time. We talked about why isn't globalization, or why Walmart was not successful in being able to spread like to say to Europe. Well, these are some of the difficulties that comes into, and I think if you look at those first 3, I think you have the answer. Is it quite simply quality real estate locations where to build stores, especially in Europe, are simply not available. physical logistics in trying to do those things in Europe is also difficult because quite simply the market or the channels in Europe are already jammed to the rafters anyway. And what happens is you have to develop new supplier relationships all over again. And in some locations, they quite simply cannot survive. Japan for years was thought of as being obstinate when it came for American retail outlets or American goods to be sold in Japan. And it has to do with more than obstinance when it comes to spreading that. Quite simply is that the culture of Japan really gets into this concept of karitsu, which is this long-term relationship and friendship. There are many cultures that won't accept you until there is a long-term interaction where you're accepted not only as a partner, but as a friend as well. I was in South Korea. I taught there for 7 weeks. And one of the things that's unique about the South Korean culture is they don't really get to know you unless you go out and get bombed with them, get drunk off your head, all right? And the reason why, quite simply, is that they have a very hierarchical structure and that they don't really feel like they know you until you had all of your personal restrictions removed. And usually that happens when you have you, okay? So the last week I was there, the graduate students wanted to take me out drinking. And I'm their teacher, all right? Yes, I'm going to go, but the last thing I'm going to do is go walk around Guangzhou being snockered off of my head, all right? So yes, you have to be sensitive to these local preferences, but you also have to be very true to yourself. Scandinavian countries are that way. I did this research on Scandinavian countries, a very hierarchical structure as well. It's kind of interesting is that outwards signs of outside of their normal structure, the way of doing things in Scandinavia is frowned upon. But if you have a few drinks and you're acting out, then that is considered an acceptable way of showing some outward signs of differences, all right? In the United States, it's entirely flipped. You can do anything you want, but if you go out and have a few drinks and are shown to be having a few drinks, that's socially unacceptable, all right? So anyway, you try to be sensitive to the local preferences. I think Walmart got that right in Asia, but because of these other things that they had, they weren't able to do it successfully. And this other thing about attractive products in a culturally sensitive manner is one of those things that we still trip over every day. The true story, the Got Milk campaign wanted to broaden its wings and be able to appeal to more than just, English-speaking individuals. And so they started a campaign in where they wrote in Spanish, they wrote, milk, the milk thing. Well, the problem is that after a week they realized, Got Milk campaign, that's it, Got Milk campaign. The problem is that the wording that they used translated into, are you lactating? Serious, okay? So what they had to do is after the week, after it was going, oh my gosh, what they had to do is they changed the script because Hispanic families are traditionally strong. They changed it to milk strong bones for strong families. So those are the things that can happen. So the difficulty, of course, is that big gets bigger. the virtuous cycle is that the greater the economies of scale, the more efficient you are, you benefit from the bigness, and the bigness just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And so we now know that basically international competition is a given. We have to find a way of living with it, or we find a way of localizing ourselves and being special to the consumers that we always have been. And we have made it through retailing. So I will see you all next Tuesday. The actual position paper will be due next Thursday. And I hope you have a great weekend, and I hope to see you out over by the Horn of the West, and have a great, take care. Yes, and I will send that out. Thank you for reminding me.